We are all little flames, poorly sheltered by frail walls against a storm of disillusion and madness, in which we flicker and sometimes almost go out. Then the muffled roar of the battle becomes a ring that encircles us. We creep in upon ourselves, and with big eyes stare into the night. Our only comfort is the steady breathing of our comrades asleep, and thus we wait for the morning. All Quiet on the Western Front starts sometime in early 1916, in which Paul is a relatively happy and experienced soldier. But it soon becomes evident that without his friends, he can't live, and as more and more of his friends die, the more clear this becomes. In the end, Paul dies without much regret on a quiet day on the Western Front. This is the best war book of the 20th century. I am Elliot Johnson, and I am merely a student who's read All Quiet on the Western Front, and I believe that it means to tell the story in this particular way. Although some might disagree, it is blatantly obvious that the strongest theme throughout the book is camaraderie and comradeship. And this is something that I understood early on in the reading. It's had a relatable and profound effect on me, since the more I think about it, the more similar we students are to Paul before the war, and how equally susceptible we are to having our childhood snatched away. The way it paints this realistic, relatable, and vivid image of war is shocking to the reader. I started the book as someone who had significant knowledge of the way World War I was won, but I had no clue about the life of the common soldier, and especially not a soldier on the losing side, since most of the books I have read are either published by British or American companies and written by British or American authors. The German protagonists made the war that much more horrifying, since one's enemy is just as human as one's ally. I was also horrified by the examples of soldiers going virtually insane during battle. In Chapter 6, a recruit is repeatedly smashing his head against the wall like a goat. Even Paul himself has trouble with his mental health towards the end of the book. Every day and every hour, every shell and every death, cuts into this thin support, and the years wasted rapidly. I see how it is already gradually breaking down around me. I could easily see how, if alongside my friends from school, I was shoved into a brutal war, the bloodiest the world has ever seen so far, I could see my friends as the only one I could lean on, and the only ones that understood me. I could see how they could even become my family. This realization makes it even more sad and depressing as Paul's comrades die, one by one, ending in him at last. When he died, I was actually relieved, since he wouldn't have had a good life if he'd survived a few more weeks until the war ended. Paul's life was miserable without his comrades. He had no one to relate to. His family didn't understand. His teachers certainly didn't understand. In fact, he blamed them for his predicament. The only people that understood, and the only people that he truly cherished, were his comrades. And once they were gone, he had no one to go to. Throughout the twists and turns of Paul's life, his friends have been there for him, his academic life, and then his life as a soldier. They have literally been through hell and back with him, and he has been through hell and back with them. The whole book is based off of this. It is proven in lit charts. His companions are what drives Paul to get up in the morning and keep fighting, and the book can't stress this enough. Alongside his companions, no battle can daunt Paul, no enemy can scare him, and no artillery can stop him. But in Chapter 9, when he is stranded in a shell hole during an attack, he gets frozen in fear, and it is only his comrades shouting for him that allows him to make the dash back to the friendly trench. World War I was the first war where killing on such a massive scale was possible. Hundreds of men could die in a single artillery barrage, and a whole company could be mowed down by a machine gun nest. In the late 19th century, the machine gun was invented. This resulted in defensive warfare far outpacing offensive warfare. So, when World War I came along, different sides were using attack strategies that they'd been using for the 1800s, and the defensive warfare had already moved on to the 1900s. This resulted in a huge death rate amongst the attackers, and it would take years for proper strategies to be developed that were effective against the defending trenches. This means that the horror of war had been ramped up by the time Paul came along, and the only way he could get through it was with his friends. Erich Maria Remarque, the author of the book, clearly wrote the book for two primary groups of people: the veterans of the First World War and the civilians and older generations that were alive but didn't fight in the war. The book clearly wasn't oriented towards me, a child who was born 90 years after the war had already ended, but I'm pretty sure that I understand what it was going for. I believe that it's meant to affect these boys into growing men. They start out as fairly seasoned veterans, having gotten their childhood snatched away by war. The older generation is responsible for this. But the thing is, the older generation isn't fighting in this war, and the reality is that this war is like no other. No war has been this bloody, horrific, and terrible. They are adults at the end of the book, not relying on their family, but on each other. The war has turned them from boys into men. All Quiet on the Western Front is a book about camaraderie, bravery, modern war, the hypocrisy of the older generation, and so much else. It is a book that defined the view of on World War I forever, and most of all, it is a book that resonates with its readers. A book that even a stuck-up 8th grader can understand. And that is what makes it great. He fell in October 1918, on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front that the Army report confined itself to a single sentence: all quiet on the Western Front. To the lost generation, to those that fought in the war, to those that died in the war, and most of all, to those that helped make the world what it is today, a peaceful world filled with no violence. Thank you.
Wonderful you, commonplace me, beautiful